All right, we are live.
Okay. Wait a minute or two.
I think if you're feeling comfortable, Colleen, we can go. It's 7:01.
Okay,
But
great.
we can wait another minute if you'd like.
Oh no, I'm fine. I'm good to go.
All right.
Hi everyone. Hi everybody. Thank you for joining us to discuss the book Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. We're going to begin with a couple introductions tonight because we have some wonderful guest panelists this evening. I'm going to begin with Monica Merrill. She's the Assistant Professor of Criminal Justice and Forensic Sciences at YSU. Her area of expertise is criminology, victimization, sexual assault, and inequalities of gender, race, and class. And we also have John Pettit. He is the managing attorney for community legal aid housing and consumer programs. He oversees cases and legal projects related to housing, stability, foreclosures, evictions, preserving subsidies, discrimination, debtor defense, along with bankruptcy practices. John has also worked in family and supervised health attorney staff, and he has worked with the Jesuits in Cleveland and Detroit, combining spirituality and practice and serving at homeless shelters with legal clinics and Law on Wheels outreach programs in urban communities. And we're hoping tonight that Dion Doty, who is the Executive Director of United Returning Citizens in Youngstown, will be joining us. The program that she which is the URC, is designed for re-entry into life after incarceration. The URC offers work, education, and employment services, housing assistance, case management services, including money management, character building, single mother resources, and substance abuse programs. She is also the board president for Community Legal Aid and has previously served as an AmeriCorps Vista with the Taft Promise neighborhood. And just so you guys know who I am, who this person is that's talking, my name is Colleen Duchon, and I am the reference librarian for Health and Human Services at Youngstown State University. And I'm now going to hand off the mic to Star.
Hi, I'm Star Jones. I'm the librarian at the Youngstown Public Library. And I'm going to give you a quick summary of the book that we read. The book is Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. And there are currently two versions, the regular version and then an adapted for young adult version, which is this one here. Just Mercy is pretty much a memoir of the law career of Bryan Stevenson. He founded the Equal Justice Initiative, which is an organization based out of Alabama, and they provide free legal assistance, especially to those on death row and to juveniles who are in prison for life. Most of the people that they've worked with end up, they find out had bad childhoods or suffer from mental illnesses, and they provide help for them. Throughout the book, Bryan discusses some of his own life experiences and the lives of those he helps, and the different trials and prison experiences of the people that he's involved with. He sheds light on the injustices of the legal system and some of the prejudices that people face, and some of the horrors of the prison life. The main focus is a case about Walter McMillian, who was a man who was convicted of a murder he did not commit. He was put on death row even before his trial began. And as the work began on his case, there were so many lies and cover-ups and problems that the story of his case is almost unbelievable. And the irony of his story is that he was a Black man convicted of murdering a white woman in the same small Southern town where the book To Kill a Mockingbird was set. Bryan asserts that we need to embrace our brokenness so that we can create a desire for mercy and a need to show mercy to others. And I want to quickly read one of the passages that kind of sums up his belief and what he's trying to convey in his book. He writes, "My work has taught me a vital lesson. Each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done. I am persuaded that the opposite of poverty is not wealth. The opposite of poverty is justice. Finally, I've come to believe that the true measure of our commitment to justice, fairness, and equality cannot be measured by how we treat the rich, the respected, and the privileged among us. The true measure of our character is how we treat the poor, the disfavored, the accused, the incarcerated, and the condemned." And I think that's the main focus of his book, is trying to get people to see mercy and justice for everyone. So now I'm going to turn it over to Bridget, who will introduce herself and get our discussion going.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bridget. I'm a librarian for the Public Library of Youngstown and Mahoning County, currently located at the Tri-Lakes branch. And I want to hear from our panelists before we get too involved in the book discussion. I would like all of our panelists to unmute themselves if you haven't already. And I want to hear from everybody what your experiences are working on issues of racial justice, and if there are any direct parallels between the book and your work. So Dion, do you mind if we start with you, because you're first alphabetically?
Yes. Yes.
So please talk about yourself a little bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'm Dion Dowdy. I work with returning citizens. I'm the executive director of United Returning Citizens. And what we do is give them new lifestyles. We help support them. We help encourage them. We help give them opportunities and resources that can help them transition in the lifestyle right now. Is my background loud for you all?
You're fine. We can hear you.
I'm
just fine.
outside. Okay.
Which is lovely.
Yeah.
Who wouldn't want to
Yes,
be?
I'm outside. Yeah. So, and what's really parallel? Should I continue?
If you'd like.
Okay. To me, what's parallel to the book of what I've read so far and myself is the hope that he has constantly in the process of getting his clients free. And going through that process, even with my clients that I have, sometimes they have no hope. So many times in that book that I've read, because sometimes I'm tired of reading that part of it. But the part that I read, that it was the hopelessness that I see that my clients come with all the time, and the upliftingness that he did is something that is parallel to what we do. When our clients come in, the first thing we have to do is empower them, and empowering them allows them to trust us like they trusted him, And so once they trust you, then they'll give you information. Then they'll tell you their needs. Then they'll tell you their wants. Then they tell you the stories that are going on, within their clique or in their demographic or in their family. And that's something that I work with. It's an ego thing. Some of them really don't want to explain that or give that. But being comfortable or trustworthy gives you, that power to express yourself. And in these days, even with the quarantine, that's what you're doing. I think that's something that we need. A lot of my clients, it was like somewhat of a PTSD or mental breakdown that we seen sometimes in the book. There was a lot of that going on with them, and it was a hush thing. Some things they couldn't express, some things they couldn't say. That took them right back to being in prison. Happened to be with the quarantine and happened to be inside and things like that. So it kind of parallels so much of what's going on right now that was going on to the book. It seems like it keeps continuing. Understanding when he says that it just keeps continuing.
Right. John, do you mind telling us a little bit about you? You're next alphabetically by first name, so I thought I'd pick on you.
Okay, sure.
Same question.
Yeah. So Yeah, I love the book. It was a number of years ago when I first read it, and it was recommended by a colleague of mine at Legal Aid, and it was just so inspirational, and it really helped direct my thinking towards what we need to do as attorneys. We have a great responsibility, and of course Brian Stevenson took that on, and he could have worked anywhere, with his background, and he could have done anything. He could have done corporate law. He could have, but he devoted his career to helping, the lowly. And I really found a lot of inspiration in that. And it's helpful sometimes. Brian worked in criminal law, and of course he talked a lot about the death penalty and the cases he was involved with. And I work at Legal Aid, and we do civil law. And there are many, many parallels to how our justice system treats people of color very differently. And, one of my jobs is to manage our housing team. And so we're in the midst of an eviction crisis right now. Just mass eviction numbers are coming through, and they're going to continue to come through. And we know the number one person who gets evicted demographically is generally a single Black mother with children. And we see that coming through our doors and who we represent. And we say, why is that? And a case I had in Youngstown, a housing case, it reminded me, and it certainly not the notoriety that like in Brian's case, but this person, and I fell into the case. It wasn't I wasn't the regular attorney assigned, but that attorney was on vacation, and this person had a hearing, and she was being evicted from her public housing. And when I took on the case and I met with the other attorney and even the magistrate, they were looking at me like, "What are you doing here? Why are you representing, this person? Do you know what your client did? Do you know your client was harboring somebody that just committed a murder here on the premises 2 weeks ago, and you're going to defend her?" And and so in the book, Brian right away gets confronted by that judge saying, "What are you doing, taking on this case?" And so, I think, and in that particular case, it was totally false. The allegations against her were totally false. There was somebody else that was arrested for that murder. The client had nothing to do with it. And, we were able to stop the eviction because we made them prove their case, but it was an uphill battle. And, it just showed me that, it made me grateful for the work we do at Legal Aid, because we get the opportunity to jump in there. There's 100% no doubt in my mind she would have been evicted had we not stepped in. And those stories go on and on. And so, our system is set up where, it's inspiring to me and other lawyers that I work with. And of course, Dion is president of our board, and we're happy to have her, that, this is an opportunity for us to use Brian's example to make a difference in the lives of people that certainly they just wouldn't have a chance without people deciding to use the law for good rather than for profit.
Well, thank you. That's fascinating. I don't know what to say right now, except now I have to bother Monica. You're next on the list. Do you remember what the question was?
Vaguely, I'll work with it, yeah.
All right.
So my name is Monica Merrill, and I teach criminal justice courses at YSU. I teach all of our diversity courses, and one of the classes that I teach is race, ethnicity, and crime. And it's a course that's becoming more and more popular as the issues that we have right now are becoming more into the conversation. And so one of the things that I really liked about the book and how I thought it connected to my role is its readability. And Bridget, I was fascinated when you told me that there was actually a young adult version of this book. I thought that was absolutely amazing, because this isn't something, death penalty, issues with race. This isn't something that's, normal conversation for a lot of people that don't have to have it. And, the students that we have in this course express an interest in it, and they come into it from a variety of different backgrounds. They come into it not really knowing a lot of the history, and that's one of the things I thought the book did really well, was provide kind of a readable version of history. They talk about Supreme Court cases. They talk about past examples of voter disenfranchisement. They talk a lot about that, and that's things that we go over in the course. And the other thing that I really liked about the book and how it connects to kind of educating about criminal justice was that it really highlighted the role of the fact that a lot of the offenders are actually previous victims. And I think Dion talked a little bit about that too. So I think people that don't have experience with the criminal justice system just kind of check the box of good or bad for people, judging on that one act. And this book did a lot talking about the people that were, on death row, talking about their background, talking about their experiences in the military, in, Vietnam, for example, or talking about their trauma that they endured in childhood. And so I really liked that they brought that to light as well. And the last thing that I think really connected to criminal justice education is they really addressed the role of the impact on families. So we talked a lot about Walter's family in the book. They talked a lot about the other families of the other people, the juveniles, the women that they discussed. So again, when we focus on criminal justice reform, usually in kind of base level conversation, we're not looking at the impact on families. We're not looking at the impact on, whole communities. And so that's one thing that I really thought the book did well that relates to what we try to do at YSU.
Well, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and ask a question. I think I might already know the answer, but you have to ask it at every book club meeting. Did you like the book? Anybody can go ahead and say what they thought. Did you like the book?
I'll go ahead. I really enjoyed the book, probably for multiple reasons. I was a political science major as my undergrad, so all the court cases and stuff I found interesting. I also had minors in like sociology, so all that information, Monica talked about how it affects families and communities and race and all that stuff. And I think it's just such a powerful, important book that everyone needs to read and everyone needs to be educated on and have their eyes open to, because it's just so important. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I can jump in. I love the book. I will admit, I'm not a big reader. I know that with a group of people associated with libraries and colleges, that's maybe not a great thing, but I did a lot of my reading in law school. And so I kind of got burned out in reading. And so I don't read a lot of books every year, maybe a couple a year. And I do think the old adage that we don't find the book finds us, and I think that was really true with this book. It really it played an instrumental part in how I looked at my job and being involved much more with racial equity programs through legal aid after reading it. And so yeah, it's a fantastic book.
I like the book. I have a 2020 catch of it. I like the book before the information that it gives, but the book is like repetitive for me. Like, reading it sometimes, like, I don't even want to read it because it's the same feelings and the same emotions that come up for me all the time. These are things that I've known that, my cousins, my brothers, my fathers, people that I know have gone through this experience. So sometimes reading these books trigger me, you know what I mean? And so I watched the movie, which was kind of better for me. Like I said, I'm not a reader also, but I read the notes and I read some of it. but it's something on page that I know that on 15 that I underlined that like kind of stood out, and just like what I worked for and what I do for, returning citizens, because this is what I believe that like going on. It says we've given up on rehabilitation, education, and service. This is on page 15 for the imprisonment because providing assistance to the incarceration is apparently too kind and too compassionate, which, wait a minute, that is, hold on, y'all. I'm gonna have
That's all right. I'll go ahead and mute yourself, do what you need to. That was an excellent point, though. An excellent point that it is too close to home sometimes.
Yeah, and it was saying giving up the rehabilitation, education, and the service for the imprisoned because of providing assistance to the incarceration, apparently too kind for the compassionate. And sometimes, we've seen it. We just seen it, on videos. We've seen it on cameras these days and stuff. How, it's just not a good resources or opportunities for people either going to jail or getting indicted or anything like that. It's like there's so many people that are not guilty in the system. There's so many people that go through the system after 30 and 40 years, their lives have been taken, and then, someone comes and save them, that's heartening. That's heartening for me. That's heartening for my communication. And in the book, I understand Stephen House. He compels and he pushed through that because just going through these clients and seeing the hope for them, which I understand him, it makes you push. You know what I mean? You get your accolades from your cohorts, which is okay, which is cool. But actually seeing those people when they get out and they see their families and they have new lives and stuff, that's invigorating for me for what I do for my organization. So that book it triggers me to constantly feel those feelings of oppression and despair, but also the work that he's done allows me to know that what I'm doing and what I'm pushing for, is something that can be done. He's done it. And so that, we can do the process to do it. It just encourages me and inspires me to keep doing the things that I'm doing to support the returning citizens.
Thank you. That's, I think, all excellent points from everyone. I do want to talk about, Monica had mentioned earlier about the difference between the YA and the adult version, because I read them both. I started with the YA version and I really liked it. And then when I started reading the adult version, it provided much more context, I think. So if you're a high school teacher or if you're a parent, I can see why you might choose the YA version if you're trying to talk to your kids about it, if you're trying to bring a discussion to the table that's more age appropriate, and perhaps shorter, because getting people to read with you probably want to start with the shorter version than the longer version. But the adult version, the original version, had a lot more context, which I thought was helpful. Although particularly I noticed it was a lot of context about Alabama state law at the time. And I wonder, is there anything particularly unique about Ohio law when working with these sorts of cases that people should be aware of? That, I guess, is a question for John out of more than anybody else.
It's interesting. It's a good question. And, certainly the book portrays Alabama law as being backward, right? In the whole process, and if backward is the opposite of progressive in some ways. And so the whole process there in Alabama, the system was, certainly slanted against poor, people of color, certainly. But I see parallels in Ohio, and again, I not to continue to come back to the evictions, but the law is a movement, and I think we've made some progress, in our criminal justice system to certainly protect some of the rights. We have a long way to go, and of course we have the whole everything going on now, and there needs to be a deeper conversation about policing and how we address those things in our communities. But, you know, from the rights that maybe people had 20, 30 years ago, I think there's more of an awareness in our criminal justice system. We haven't gone as far as we need to go, but at least the awareness is there. But in our civil system, and I specify about evictions, I don't think we're there yet. I think all kinds of horrendous things go on, and people get evicted. I mean, your eviction hearing literally can last 20 seconds, you know, and you're out, and you know, the bailiff can be at your door in a matter of days. And the percentages of people that have attorneys for an eviction is just incredibly low. You know, most landlords or property owners have an attorney, and the overwhelming majority of tenants don't. And you know, legal aid gets involved in those cases on some, but there's no right to have a lawyer if you can't afford one, you know, in that system. And, you know, when you look at the cases that where tenants have an attorney, 60, 70% are not evicted, you know, and so there's just a huge gap there. And so some ways, Alabama was backward in how it focused on its criminal justice system. I think Ohio, you know, is still in some ways backward, because not all states are like this. A lot of states say that if you can come up with the money to pay your rent, even by the day of the hearing, you have a right to stay. In Ohio, you don't. If you're a day late or $1 short, doesn't matter if you come up with the money. The landlord, the property owner can still put you out. And so I think we have to you know, we have to make progress there. And I think, you know, there'll be books written, and there are books written, and I would encourage, you know, the book Evicted by Matthew Desmond certainly talks about the eviction crisis. You know, what Brian talked about then, I think people will be talking about, you know, in the near future, about how we treated tenants.
Just writing that down. Evicted by Matthew Desmond, right?
Yes, yeah,
I
fantastic.
do love a book recommendation.
Yeah, you could tell the librarians were like, what was that? And we all wrote it down.
So John, you were saying that there's awareness now. So what kind of awareness do you think that it is? Like, as far as what, the eviction, or just social justice as a whole, or like what's the
Yeah.
way that you all, I'm just asking anyone this question. What is the awareness that you all see?
Well, for me personally, I don't know. I don't see enough awareness in my case. I know I was reading some comments on some news articles lately, which, you know, they always say avoid reading the comments, but people were saying,
Yeah.
I'm tired of these discussions reading about racial inequality. And I was thinking, you know, people are tired of living with racial inequality, but it's a very difficult thing to try to convey to somebody. Just because it's outside of their experience doesn't mean that it doesn't exist anymore. So I'm not sure on a personal level, but I think the fact that books like this are getting published and made into movies is also a step in the right direction. I just wish it was gaining more traction myself. But that's an excellent question. I'll bounce it to anybody else who wants to answer.
I mean, I think that you're correct in saying that if that's not your truth, if that's not your world, it's easy to dismiss things or say, I don't want to think about it anymore. I don't want to talk about it anymore. But if that is your world, you need to talk about it. And people who say they don't want to hear about it anymore need to open their eyes. I mean, I can't speak to other people's experiences, but I know what I've seen and what I've read. I, at one point, was living in South Carolina and saw things that I couldn't believe would happen, honestly. Like, men came to the house to pick up boxes after we moved. There was a white man and a black man that came to the door, and the white man rang the doorbell and said, can he come in your house? Pointing to the other gentleman who was black. And we're like, what? And he repeated it, and we're like, well, sure, why not? And he said, a lot of people don't want him to come inside their house. This was in the 90s. I mean, not that long ago. I saw this with my own eyes. I don't live it, but I saw it. And if people maybe who didn't live that world even could open their eyes and experience it in any sort of way and be aware in any way they can, that's, I mean, that's what has to happen, I guess.
I think from what I've experienced, and these are hard conversations to have. They really aren't, especially coming from, not knowing what that was like. I mean, I grew up not really realizing that any of these things were happening in the first place. And, seeing, I think my life changed once I was exposed to more of the world. Getting an education drastically changed everything. Reading more drastically changed everything. And, this probably goes back to the fact that I am a, college librarian and academic librarian, but I think so much of this has to deal with people just exposing themselves and getting out into the world and understanding that your situation isn't everybody else's situation. And I'm not going to have the same life experiences as everybody else, but I still at this point understand what is right versus what is wrong, and what is just versus what isn't. And I've been telling tons of people that I know to read this book because I knew on the basis of some of these things that were going on. I mean, I think you'd have to be walking around, completely oblivious to the world to not understand that these things are happening in places. But especially now in these times when you're seeing Black Lives Matter protests and you're seeing how things are being done and how people are being treated, you're seeing Confederate, statues coming down. I think that this is a time of more awareness based on that. I mean, I would never say that, yay, we brought down a couple Robert E. Lee statues. Like, we're definitely on the path, because I think the criminal justice system can be very slow to change. But I do think just based on social media and cameras, like, would this have happened, had George Floyd not been murdered in cold blood where people were recording it? I don't know. I mean, I think that awareness is changing just based on the fact that you don't have to necessarily go out into the world as much as the world is coming to you through social media and other platforms, where previously these things might have been a little more hidden to you. In the 80s, when I was growing up, I was completely and totally unaware of these things going on. It wasn't until I got older.
Well, and that's why it's good there's a YA version of this book, because now you can give it to, your age appropriate audience, but also read along in the adult version. And I think this would be a great resource for educators. And if you are an educator and you're watching this, the EGI.org has the teacher's guide and everything like that as well. I just want to put that out there in case, Monica, you might want to teach this in your class or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. They have this in the race course and in the victimization course. They have this book as an option to read, and a lot of students choose it. I don't know if they're just watching the movie, telling me their book, but.
What are your students' impressions of this book? Do you know of any? Have you talked to anybody about that yet?
Yeah, I've talked to a few students about it, and they've written, they have to do like a book review in each of those courses. And the majority of them that read this book specifically, they're angry, kind of as Dion mentioned. It is hard to read, just kind of like blow after blow after blow. It kind of, maybe it doesn't put you in the best headspace. But once they get past that, they get angry, and then I think where like the missing next step for education anyway is how to direct that anger. They're like, well, this is awful and it needs to change. And then they're kind of left, wondering what those next steps are.
Do you think Brian Stevenson leaves anybody with ideas of what the next steps are? Do you think Dion had mentioned that he is demonstrating that it's possible, that he is making space for other people to start picking up where he's going. But do you feel like there's any direct call to action here? Anyone?
I think that it does. He called to action. You know, he pushed forward. You know, he went past the ways. I think that gives a lot of people hope and faith that, you know, not to give up. That's, you know, to a lot of people that's not a lot, but to a lot of people that is, you know, just to keep continuing on. When you have a goal of something and never giving up to that, that gives you a purpose, you know, to get up every day or keep moving every day. I think that he definitely gave us a pathway to what's the next thing to do. He gave us information. He gave so many statistics. He gave experience, you know, he gave, the main thing to me is just hope. That's the main thing that I've gotten out of that. Always, when I read it, when I see it, it's the same thing. It's just the hope.
Yeah, hope is important. Hope will get you far.
I think that what he wants people to take away is, I think he'd like people to change their mindset instead of, like John was talking about, why are you defending this woman? Do you know what she did? I think his call is to have everybody just look at others in a different way. That even if she committed whatever she did, whether she did or not, she has a whole life that's more than just that one thing.
He
Now,
even
in this
says
case,
that in the book.
right.
Yeah.
So even though in this case she was innocent, but what if she had done something, but isn't her life still worth something? And isn't her
Right.
family still worth it? And shouldn't we be merciful and look at her in a different way than just she did something bad, so she deserves every punishment that she gets? And if enough people change that mindset to people do deserve mercy and people do deserve another chance, and we should look at these people a different way, then maybe if enough people felt that way, then the times would move a little bit faster.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
sometimes, you know, I don't even know if we as people deflect, you know, that's why that we have those judgments, or that's why we have that hatred, because that's something that we're just deflecting, you know, from ourselves. Sometimes we got to look a little deeper than what the surface is, what the media is, what the status quo is, you know, to sometimes dig deep to see what the problem is, or even just starting to see a resolution for it.
I like what I think he said his grandmother, when he was going into this work, she's looked at him and said, you know, you're going to be tired. He said, you know, you know, and I think that, you know, that's a lesson too, you know, and that because some of us, and none of us are perfect, and I certainly don't claim to understand the whole system or, you know, but it's one of those things where, you know, the fight for justice is tiring, you know, but that's okay. And then we, you know, we see it with our friends and family members, and, you know, engaging in these political arguments that are tiring, right? But sometimes, you know, it is incumbent upon us to have those conversations, because somebody had it with us, you know. And I forget, you know, who mentioned it, but, you know, in the 80s, you know, we didn't know or whatever, you know. And I you know, I grew up the same way in a very white community, and you know, I would not have identified with this book reading it, you know, back then. I might have learned something. I think it would have been helpful to read it. And of course, I appreciate what Dion is saying about her experience, that it's difficult to read, you know, but for, you know, white people that haven't had that experience, it's educational for us. We
Right.
need to read it. We need to know. We need to listen, and then we need to share it with you know, other people like us, that to say, you know, this world may not be the experience for other people that you think it is for you, you know. And so, and to continue pushing on, even though that sometimes gets tiring to have those conversations, but we, you know, it's our responsibility.
We do have to
Marie,
have a
I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. And we do have to know that everyone is not going to perceive the book the same way. It's different experience when we
Yeah.
all read that book. You know, it's a beautiful book, but it's just different experience. And sometimes in conversation, you have to be understanding and empathetic to another person that feels different, that read that book, because that's just how they feel. No different than you saying that it's educational. I can understand that, you know, from your point of view. And I even, I mean, you saying that back in the day, like you would have never even fathomed reading this book. It would be nothing more but educational to you. But to me, it would be life stories that I've heard, or, you know, that I could agree with or relate it, you know, with. So it's a totally different experience. But for us both to come together, you know, and talk about it, and you get something from it, and for me to hear that it's educational, I think that's the communication, the consistent communication that we all need to have.
Marie on Facebook says that she saw Bryan Stevenson speak in 2016 and said he's very dynamic, and anyone who ever gets the chance to go see him. She also says that she found it interesting that Bryan doesn't directly for sure say his take on capital punishment as a policy. I know that he talks about how he's against it for minors and he works against some of that, but I don't know if he actually came out in the book and said that in all cases it's always incorrect. I can't remember for sure.
No, he said in all cases, you know, no, that it wouldn't be correct. I think some things that, you know, he do believe that the death penalty is so. Being in that environment and hearing those stories and seeing what things, I mean, things that people have done, you know, you do have a different judgment or experience of it, you know. And I can agree with him. Some things that you do think that, you know, that you feel like, you know, it should be for death row, and some things that you don't, you know. So I understand him in that, because being in there, hearing the stories, and, you know, seeing the things that people done, some things that people do, you know, you just, you know, it's just not right, you know. We'll say that.
I think it's interesting, somebody who saw him speak. I wonder how that charisma carried across in the courtrooms when he was talking too. That would be probably definitely to his advantage. I mean, it's his own writing, so he can write himself however he wants, but I did not feel like it was so much a memoir as it was a story about other people where he was just the vehicle for it. So I thought that was interesting. I did get a sense of the charisma from the text.
I listened to the audiobook originally, and I believe he was the narrator of that, and he was very dynamic in his reading. So I can imagine that he would have been very dynamic in a case in court.
Because he has so much passion for it. Just like when he said he even came in the first day, even talking to him, the experience that he thought that he would have was totally different than when he left, you know? I mean, when you come in thinking one way and it totally changed your mind and blows you away, you know?
I think maybe also what adds to his ability to communicate is he seems like a very genuine person. You know, sometimes you hear people and they're loud, but you kind of get the sense that you have slight distrust, but you don't get that with him at all. Like everybody seems to trust him. And I think that just adds, beside him being a good speaker and a good writer, that it just helps create that good dynamic speaker that he would be.
And mostly everybody relates to transparency. And I think he was very transparent in everything that he do and his passion.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that he was, like, he portrayed in the book too, how compassionate and empathetic he was as well. Mm-hmm. And how, you know, he would walk in, and regardless of who he was talking to, whether it was, you know, a juvenile with mental handicaps, or if he was walking in and talking to somebody who was wrongfully imprisoned, he had the ability to connect and communicate really well with every single one of those people that he worked with, which I think is a blessing. I think that's, you know, he was blessed to have that ability to to comfort and to connect with everyone he walked in with, because I would feel, especially in that job where, you know, you get over one hurdle and they put a brick wall in front of you, and then you knock down the brick wall and suddenly there's concrete in front of you. Like, you would have to think that would be so tiring and so hard to constantly go up against that. And there was one part of the book where he did talk about how exhausted he was and how tired he was, but he just kept going. He was like, all right, that's enough, like, get up, keep going. And I found that to be really an incredible part of his character too, was that, you know, he was compassionate, he could connect with anybody, and he just kept driving to do what he thought was right. A lot of people, I think, would have, you know, gotten discouraged and maybe would not have been able to take that kind of constant rebuttal, you know.
Yeah, he, you know, I've seen him too, and thanks, Marie, because I went up and I seen him in Cleveland, and then I seen him again as he was speaking in Chicago, and he's very humble. And so the difference is, and it comes across, I think, in the book, maybe not as much in the movie, but you know, we do see these movie characters, and we see these famous lawyers, Johnny Cochran, F. Lee Bailey, you know, these, you know, Matlock, all that, you know, and he doesn't come across that way. You know, he's very humble, and, you know, and I'm sure, I've never seen him in the courtroom, but I'm sure he could be dynamic, but as other people touched on it, he's very genuine, very transparent, and very caring, you know, and you know, in this case was a success, the McMillan, you know, situation. But I'm sure he had, for every one success, he had, you know, many that, you know, didn't, but he was there with them. He walked with them. You know, he gave, I think he talked a lot about the dignity of human beings, no matter what. And that's a great lesson, I think, for all of us, that there's a humanness that we're all connected to, and you know, he used his knowledge of the law to really connect and you know, to be there with people who wouldn't have somebody there otherwise. So yeah.
The part that I had a hard time with especially was when he talked about how he actually promised the one guy that he would be with him when he was executed, and how he visited with him before that happened, and that was very hard to think about and to read. And I can't imagine how hard that would have been for him to do that, but he did it because he said he would, and he wanted to be there for that person, and he was. That had to be extremely difficult. I can't imagine.
Right. There were a lot of scenes that were difficult to read, and I can't imagine what it would have been like to have to live those scenes. Although one scene I could picture myself in, and maybe some other people felt the same, when he's driving his crappy car back home from visiting someone in prison, and he pulls over and he's dancing to the music because it's one good song after another. He can't get out of the car yet. Because we've all done that, haven't we? Is that not a universal experience?
Yes, it is. It is. It is.
So that, you know, you can really relate to him then, and then what happens after that really calls to mind like what it is to have privilege as well, because I feel like I can jam out to my car no matter what the volume in front of my own house at home, but he couldn't because he was suspicious to somebody in his neighborhood. Did anybody else have a scene like that where it started out one way and then maybe became something different and opened your eyes to something?
I don't think I had necessarily that moment. I think I read the entire book like on pins and needles. Even things that ended up being positive at the end, I was constantly like, oh God, like something bad is going to happen, because it was just the setup for you know, a lot of the cases, you know, they get, you know, one thing kind of passed and then something else bad would happen. Or, you know, I think I was more on the edge of my seat waiting for something else bad to happen, which I felt like was kind of interesting in the way that this was was the way that I read it too, because, you know, imagine being a person who's on death row or in prison for something that you didn't do. That is your entire life, is sitting on pins and needles. And I felt like that was the really interesting connection that I had with the book. Now, obviously, I'm not equating those two things at all, because that would be insane. But I think it was a really great way of how he wrote the book, was that I could feel anxiety and hopelessness at times, and you know, the compassion. I don't know. I felt that was a really interesting aspect of that book, that I felt, you know, a connection to it in that way.
Yeah, I think I felt something similar to that. There, like, some parts of it gave me some anxiety, and I kind of approached it a little bit differently. Like, the part that affected me was, you know, he was talking about going and starting his law office, or, you know, nonprofit, and was looking at the cases that were coming in, and there was an execution date next month, and there's one the month after. And it occurred to me that, like, there's no good place, you know, you're kind of triaging, right? Like, in my head, I was thinking, okay, you're kind of like in a collapsing building, and you're like pulling the people out that need pulled out the quickest, but that leaves you no time to like shore up the walls of the building so nobody else gets crushed, right? So you're just kind of doing this triage on this individual level. But there wasn't a whole lot of talk of like structural change in the book, which, you know, that wasn't its purpose. I'm not knocking it for that, but it made me think, you know, this is great to do on this kind of micro level, but if we want to stop it, then we got to kind of look at the bigger picture. And so when we're thinking about like next steps, that's where I think my head goes.
Okay, so maybe that's the call to action you got from the book was, all right, there are some people who are here to help the individuals in the system who are caught, and then there are people like the individuals who are meant to change the system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe that's who you're educating at YSU, right?
Oh, let's hope.
I like the fact that he made the awareness so big that there are innocent people in prison. There are a lot of innocent people in prison. He made that very awareful. Like, people are really aware that they're thinking about that. They see that, you know, they're looking up things for that. That's aware, you know. Just like, you know, we're making aware that there's a lot of returning citizens, you know, in our community. That's just something that we're aware, some things that we didn't talk about before, but now that, you know, we're aware, like, okay, they're here. Something that we're aware of.
I think it was also great of him to explain and explore some of the nuance. Some people, when they look at a charge on someone's, you know, record, they only see those words, and it calls to mind some sort of vision in their heads that may or may not correlate or line up with what actually happened to lead to that charge. Like I said, somebody had said earlier how fleshed out and how much he explored some people's backgrounds, and nearly everybody was a victim of some sort as well. And whether they were failed by the adults in their lives or by mental health care or whatever it may be, there's almost always some sort of mitigating circumstance. I think that was something else, another strength he had. Like,
I thought that was amazing too. And I think that goes a lot towards the criminal justice system. And he mentioned this in the book too, where, you know, people who have mental illness issues are thrown into prison a lot of the time. And it's become a way for people to kind of, you know, put them into a situation. And I think it goes to show with society, you know, that's one of the huge things that we're failing at, you know, is the criminal justice system shouldn't be our way of dealing with children who were sexually abused or physically abused or neglected or, you know, thrown out on the streets for whatever reason when they were 10 years old. I think that the call to action I got was that the criminal justice system cannot be the end all be all for every kind of problem in society. And I think that, you know, with mass incarcerations, that's kind of been what's happened, you know, and I think that's probably what I got out of it the most, you know, and I work with the social work program at YSU, and I know how much they're trying to do. And I know what those students are looking at and what they're studying. And so much of this has to do with, you know, those kind of issues and those people, you know, going through the traumas that they're suffering. And because they were never really taught how to deal with it, because it was never addressed, they make bad decisions, they fall into bad places, they get into the wrong crowd, they, you know, have mental illnesses that drive them to do things that they wouldn't have done otherwise. It's, to me, it was just a direct reflection on the criminal justice system and the social issues that we have in the country.
He said we fail at rehabilitation and education, you know?
Mm.
So those are the two main, you know, major things of reentry: rehabilitation and education. And you, like you were saying, it's much more on punishment. And as the years are, as we are now in the day, we know that rehabilitation and education is definitely what we need.
And I think he also said something like the judges at the time were more focused on finality than fairness, which is another thing that I think we are trying to twist it slowly in the other direction now, more towards fairness. But it is nearly 8 o'clock, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So did anybody have a thought or a comment that occurred to them that they weren't able to get in while we were discussing? Any last minute thoughts or reflections? Or questions? We won't have time to discuss a lot, but.
Oh, I have a question for our special panelists. What do you guys think people should know? Like, what is the one thing about like maybe your organizations or the things that you do that you feel could be the most impactful by people who are watching this?
Oh, for me, my people, I'll call them the 1/3 not heard. The things that people don't see or that people don't never hear. They're so gifted. They're so passionate. They're so educated from a survival street point of view that nobody sees that. And I hope to support that so people can see the greatness in them in an alternative way than people see. The narrative is going to be different. You know, that's what I get out of the narrative for what a returning citizen or a person with barrier or a person with a second chance could have.
Well, good to know.
I would just say I love the title of the book, you know, Just Mercy, and it I think sums it up, and maybe that just something for all of us to think about in the work we do. You know, if we're given an opportunity just to show mercy, you know, and he used his talents, and we all have different jobs, different roles, and you know, sometimes we can all get so caught up in the day-to-day that we forget about just being merciful to the people we're around and those that we see. And yeah, so it's a great message, and I really appreciate you guys hosting this. I think this is
I know.
perfect.
I apologize. I didn't know what to say.
Monica, to flip that a little bit, what would you want your students to take away?
What I would want my students to take away would be kind of a combination of what Dion and John said, that the people that are in the criminal justice system are actually people. They're not just a statistic. They're not just a function of one poor decision or a culmination of failings of, you know, adults' mental health. They're a person. So just to kind of remember that and take that into account and treat them as such.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everybody. I think this was an excellent discussion.
works.
And we could go on for hours, I think, if we could, but I think I have a lot to think about still. I really want to discuss this more with everybody. And so I'm going to be telling everybody to read this book so they can talk about it with me.
Ditto.
Well, shall we wrap it up?
We shall.
Sure. This was a great discussion, and I hope that, like Bridget said, everybody continues to discuss this topic, and that everybody else who hasn't read the book, pick it up, get it from the library and read it. Our next book club selection will be The Martian by Andy Weir, and that discussion will be held on Facebook Live on Tuesday, August 25th at 7. And you can also join us on the Goodreads page to start discussions and comments before we do our live chat.
So thanks again to our guest panelists. It was great having all of you here. Thank you for doing the summer reading. Hooray. And thanks to
Thank
everybody.
you for inviting us.
Right. And thanks for everyone discussing along on Facebook. We appreciate you guys tuning in. So, all right.
All
Should
right.
we do the wave we do at the end of Zoom calls?
Bye.
Bye.